Hi there, this is Alfie, the host and founder of the London Technology Podcast. Thank you all for joining us today. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Rahma Javed. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here today. And yeah, it's lovely to join.
Thank you so much. So for those that don't know, you're the Director of Engineering at Deliveroo. You're on lots of other tech boards as well. But could you just start, for people that don't know, just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been working on and that sort of thing, really?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I lead engineering for the restaurants group for Deliveroo. So Deliveroo is effectively, if you consider it like a three-sided marketplace, where we have a tech group for focused for our consumer, we have a tech group that's focused for the riders who are actually making the journey, and then we have a tech group that's focused for our restaurant partners, which effectively help us deliver. And really get you the demand that the supply that you need when you go and order from the Deliveroo website or the mobile app. So yeah, I lead engineering for that group, and really my focus is how Deliveroo could become not only a profitable but one of the best partners for our restaurants that we have association with worldwide. So we're live in 13 different markets. We have over 100,000 restaurants across all these markets, and we also have restaurants in different segments. So we have restaurants all the way, starting from someone that's very bespoke, which is a restaurant that's very niche to your particular area, and building the right set of technology for them, as well as all the way across to something that is a nationwide chain, something like Wagamama's, all the way to something that's worldwide, like a Nando's or a McDonald's. And so we basically need to actually provide the right set of technology to work with each of the partners in these different cohorts that we support. I've been with Deliveroo for about 3 years, and that also coincides with the time that I moved to London. And then before that, I was in the Valley. I was at Wolfront, which is a fintech startup. And there I led the financial services area. I led the two core products in that area, one being a college savings plan, the other one being a loans product. And I also worked to build the risk platform there. And then previously to that, I was at Microsoft working on Windows, as well as Bing. And then, back in university, I did internships at IBM and BlackBerry. And I'm a graduate of University of Toronto. That's in Canada. So
Awesome.
that's a bit about me.
Quite the adventure, Canada to the Valley, now to London, and you've obviously had a real climb in your career, from starting out doing internships, initially as a tester and a developer, and now obviously the director of engineering for part of a business which is a market leader really in its space. So what advice would you give to people that are just perhaps starting out on their tech careers, or they're working as developers or testers or whatever, really, at the moment, and they really want to go to that next level and get to where you are someday? What advice would you give to those types of people?
So I think the first thing I want to share is that there is no recipe or formula. I do think a lot of life is actually about both the opportunities that come your way and then the hard work that you have to kind of show when those opportunities do show up. So when you take them on, how hard you actually work. I think one thing for me that I do think has actually really worked out is working in early stage startups that ended up just kind of taking off, whether that was starting off with Wealthfront when the engineering size was less than 10, or even actually back 3 years ago at Deliveroo, the technology group that we have at Deliveroo now versus 3 years ago is quite different. For example, my own group, I came in and I had not really much of a group. It was more about about 10 engineers here in London, right? To now actually having a group with 7 different teams and engineers located across New York and London in those teams. So yeah, firstly, there is no formula. Secondly, I think the thing to consider is actually to be focused on the opportunities that you find exciting, and taking a little bit of risk for those opportunities, right? And actually just being focused on doing like the good work that you want to do, focused on like, you know, the output and like achieving excellence in your work, rather than being focused on like chasing titles or chasing like money and stuff. So honestly, like when I started off, like could I have predicted like 10 years later like my career would be here? Like absolutely not. Neither the position nor the company nor like actually the location. But I actually just, for example, even moving to London was just something that I wanted to do from like a life experiences perspective. And then I kind of looked around and I came across Deliveroo. So for me, it's really been more about like seeking the experiences and seeking, you know, the growth that I want from my for myself from like, you know, a professional perspective. But figuring out like, you know, what sort of like projects or what sort of like, you know, companies that I could go into where I could get that level of growth, and you know, finding the right sort of environment. So yeah, I would actually really say like focus on the work, focus on like taking a bit of risk with your projects, and focus on like, you know, trying to do that rather than just like, okay, I've done this check and I've done this check and like, you know, now I can get to this position. So
Yeah, I think that's solid advice, if any. Yeah, I was speaking to somebody else the other day about this, and they kind of seconded what you said, in that if you focus on the job title and getting to that job title, you'll almost never get there because you're so caught up in the job title. But if you instead put those efforts and energy into doing the best work possible, you know, it's going to be a lot easier to get to that point because you'll be recognized for the work that you're doing, right?
yeah, and most importantly, like find the work that really like excites you, find the work that you want to get up in the morning and do, because to be honest, like it's way easier to do like amazing at something that you absolutely love doing, or like, you know, the experiences that you want, rather than like, you know, trying to even honestly give like 60% to like a job where you're like, I'm really bored, but I need to have to continue to do this because, you know, I need like this paycheck, or I need like, you know, this title or whatever, like to continue on with. So like, yeah, it's part of those experiences, like do actually figure out like what you like yourself, because I think one of the main things is like when we all graduate from university, we don't actually know what we really want. Like we have some idea, but I think that's where the experiences come in, and that's where we can actually learn like hands-on what we like and what we don't like.
Yeah, I mean, you've just kind of quoted an old Steve Jobs reference where he said that you know, you only really get one life. So you know, if you're not doing something that you are completely passionate about, it's going to be so easy to just give up when it gets hard and difficult. But having that passion, that's kind of what drives him to create you know, Apple and that sort of thing. I suppose on the subject of things that excite you and interest you, are there any technologies or innovations or ideas at the moment that you think will have a big impact on the future, which you're either looking into or just interested in? Is there anything that you're currently thinking about in this space?
I think for me in particular, like I think the different product spaces like always excite me, and like, you know, the level of innovation that exists in those different product spaces. I think in terms of like the technology aspect of it, I think, you know, it's going to be like deployment of things like, you know, like machine learning, more and more, you know, in our day-to-day like sort of like lives, in terms of like how we interact with society, like, you know, how we go on about like, you know, doing like something that is just like, you know, our day-to-day chores and stuff. And I think the other thing that I'm particularly very keen on is just the innovation in the health tech space, because I think, you know, that's a space that could like there's so much like room for innovation there, and there's so much room for us to actually discover more and more about like just the knowledge that we have currently there right now, and how much more we could actually learn. And I think, you know, the more we can actually just like start automating, again, like the tasks that we do know about, then we can start discovering and exploring the areas that are more unknown to us. So yeah, whether that's just like, you know, more research into like the genomes, or like, you know, from a surgical perspective, like, you know, actually like looking more into like doing surgeries in a more like automated fashions, or like, you know, using and deploying robots to facilitate that. I think that will then expand us to focus more on like areas that we traditionally didn't have the time to focus on.
Yeah, no, it's a game changer. You know, health tech, especially in 2021, it's for graduates. It's a brilliant industry to get involved in, really. Even people that have more experience that want to move over, and that sort of thing. What about the subject of women in technology? Because obviously it's something that's really important, and I know a lot of people are trying to advocate, especially to universities and that sort of thing, to make it more of a priority. But you know, as a woman in technology, what are your thoughts on this subject, and how do we get more women into tech roles and that sort of thing?
So I mean, I think obviously I think it's twofold, right? Like I think we need to continue working to figure out like how we can find ways to get more and more like young girls and just young women into the fields of STEM and technology, right? Like this basically like how do we actually help them like have an interest in these areas so more of them can actually be funneled into, you know, this larger field. And then I think, you know, there's another part to it, which is like, you know, what are the companies doing themselves? So like, you know, once you do get women into the door, then how do you actually continue to actually retain them, right? Like, how do you actually, and not like, you know, retention in the early years. I think, you know, a lot of companies do a pretty decent job at that. And I think a lot of like with companies, if you actually look at it, like their entry numbers, like, you know, they're focused so much on improving the entry numbers that like, you know, they're starting to look a lot better. But now I think then the problem then ends up trickling to basically like the top positions, right? And that's more about like, well, what are we doing within each of the different companies to actually make sure that women are not only retained, but they're progressed to the top, right? You know, what do we actually have to do to like for women to actually quote unquote break the glass ceiling or like, you know, break into, for example, like the bro culture for tech, right? Because, you know, you can get a lot of women into like, you know, middle management or maybe even early senior management, but then to actually break it further, like it's a lot more challenging. And part of it, the challenge is also due to like, you know, the larger responsibilities that like women traditionally have in society, because at that point they're usually maybe like considering about like starting a family or like, you know, they like not every company does like a good job in terms of like the overall even maternity leave that they have to offer, right? Not just about like women taking the leave, but like what is their opportunity to actually then come back into the role that they had, right? Without feeling like, oh, I'm joining something and I can't remember anything and like the entire workplace is completely changed. So I think, yeah, the efforts have to be done at multiple fronts, but the one that I'm seeing more and more is actually getting more women into and at top positions so that they can actually, you know, be the voice at the table, and then they can actually be a part of the fundamental changes that are being made. Because, you know, truth be told, a lot of the core changes are coming from the top. Like, you know, a big part of the culture is set with like how those rooms operate. And unless you actually have like a voice in the room that is providing that representation, it's still like a bit of a half story that you're like almost presenting. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been a ton of studies into this, into diversity and inclusion and equality, and time after time it shows that having different perspectives and voices at the table will ultimately lead to more success, you know, financially as well in business. So yeah, it's obviously an important thing both from a social perspective, but also just in order to get your company in the you know, in the right growth zone. So yeah, interesting thoughts. A question for myself, perhaps a little bit tongue in cheek, but what would be the future of food deliveries? And obviously there'll be some things that you might be working on which you can't say, and that's fine in terms of your top secrets. But when are we going to get drones delivering food or 3D printing our takeaways? Is there any no prediction? But what do you think the future looks like in this space?
I mean, I think the thing is, again, like this is like, you know, for example, using like machine learning and AI like more and more as part of those fields. I mean, I think, you know, with a lot of the food delivery companies right now, like, you know, they're really focused on like just nailing the experience, right? Like, you know, just nailing and making a very consistent and like a reliable experience for the customers, right? And that's actually a big part of even like a company like Deliveroo, right? Like, which is like, how do you not only delight customers, but how do you give them like a consistent and a reliable experience? But yeah, I mean, I think kind of like adding on to that, like in the future, I do think, you know, like, you know, then the focus could move on to like, you know, having faster deliveries and having like, you know, deliveries that like, you know, may not always be done by, and this is like, again, this is completely like separate from Deliveroo, like from my own predictions. But yeah, like, you know, actually having like, you know, deliveries that, you know, can happen in potentially an even more automated way, right? So, I mean, I think a big part of this is also about like consumer behavior and, you know, what are going to be the biggest sort of like pain points once you have nailed down a consistent and a reliable and a delightful experience, right? Like, what are the challenges that we as a society are now running into like more and more? And so I think a lot of like solutions also come from like the problems that we have, right? So automated delivery or like drone delivery, like would be something that we'd start discussing once we actually realize that there is actually a bottleneck with the current way that we are delivering today, right? In terms of like the speed or the efficiency or like the frequency of it. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really just gonna be about like going further and into the space and then just figuring out like, you know, the set of bottlenecks that come across them.
Awesome. All right, I didn't quite get your secrets on the plans for the 3D printing of food, but I'll take that. That's okay. Maybe next time. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely to speak, and hopefully everybody watching and listening got value out of this. So if you are a London technology professional, make sure that you subscribe and follow for all of the new London tech podcasts, which come out almost daily on LinkedIn and YouTube and the different platforms. Thank you so much again for your time as well. And yeah, and thanks everyone for watching. Bye for now.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.